Hey, welcome to Mountain View.
Hey, how's it going?
Great. What can I help you with today?
I need some brake pads.
Excellent. Do you know what kind of brakes you have? SRAM or Shimano?
Ooh. What's up, folks? Bekah Rottenberg here, owner and head coach of Brave Endeavors, mountain bike skills and strength training. And we are in the basement of Mountain View Cycles, located in downtown Hood River, Oregon, and it's winter. So we thought we'd switch things up and make a little tech video on how to change your brake pads. Today, I'm going to teach you how to check your pads for wear, the difference between the most common types of brake pads out there, how to buy the right pads for your bike, and then ultimately how to actually change your pads if they need to be changed. Before I dive in, I want to extend a huge thank you to Mountain View Cycles for making these videos possible. Mountain View believes in creating a community of educated and stoked mountain bike riders, well, really all cyclists in general, they don't discriminate, and they want to encourage you to bring your bike into the shop. And if you're in Hood River, I highly recommend to give them a visit. They have the absolute best customer service around. Now, why do I think it's important for you to learn how to change your brake pads? Because there's tons of other videos out there that will teach you how to do it, or you could just take your bike to your shop and have them change your brake pads. But I think if you learn how to change your brake pads, it's going to help you feel more confident about what's going on with your bike in general, and then ultimately carry that confidence out onto the trails and have more fun when you're out riding your bike. The tools and environment, or ideal environment, that you're going to want to set yourself up for success are a well-lit workspace and ideally clean. A bike stand is really helpful, it's not necessary. And then in terms of tools, you're gonna want a 2.5mm Allen key. A plastic tire lever works great to push your pistons apart. Whatever tool you need to take your wheel out, and then also a dime to check your pads for wear. Let's dive into part one, how to check your pads for wear. If you're gonna check your pads, you gotta get them out of your bike. And so a quick anatomy lesson, we've got the brake caliper, the brake rotor, and then the pads sit down there in the caliper. So in order to get your pads out, first you wanna take your wheel out of the bike. So I'm gonna push my derailleur down and use this little lock here that gets the derailleur out of the way. And then for my bike, I need a 6mm Allen to remove the axle. Another little tip is to have the chain be in the hardest gear or the smallest cog. That's gonna make your life easier. All right, so wheel is out. Another thing I always recommend when you are working on your bike is set yourself up with a clean workstation. And I was taught once to have a clean rag that everything I take off of my bike goes onto that rag, and that way I don't lose anything. To get our brake pads out, the first thing we're gonna do is take out this little wing nut clip pin thing here. Don't lose this. I was at a race once and my buddy lost it and she was freaking out. You don't actually need it. That's in my opinion, but it kind of gives you that extra bit of security. And then you're gonna use your 2.5mm Allen to get the world's tiniest bolt out. And this is where if you have, nice lighting and a stand, your life is a lot easier. So just unthread the bolt that goes onto your clean rag, and then you're gonna reach in from the top and grab your pads. And something that is really important when you're working on brakes is you don't want to touch the pads or your rotor. This is your rotor, remember, anatomy lesson. You don't want to touch them with your hands. Our hands have all sorts of oils on them, and that can contaminate your braking situation, which is going to lead to loud squealing noises coming from your brakes, which we don't want, and decreased performance. Once we've got our pads out, this is where we want to check for wear, right? Do I need to replace my pads? I've gotten to the point where I can just kind of look at them and know, but when I was first starting out, I didn't know if I needed to change my pads or not. So I like to use a dime as my measuring tool. And what I do is I take the dime and compare it to the height of the pad material that's left. And if the pads are as thick as the dime or thinner, they're what we call in the industry smoked, and you got to replace those pads. The technical measurement is 3 millimeters of pad thickness, including the backing of the brake. But I mean, in reality, who has calipers to actually measure that stuff? So I use the dime. We've learned how to check our pads for wear and if they need to be replaced. So now you're faced with this question of what type of pad am I going to use? There's two main types of brake pads. There's organic, or what are also called scintered, and then there's metallic. So SRAM uses the organic term and Shimano uses the scintered term, and then both companies use metallic. There are other brake manufacturers out there, but the two most common are SRAM and Shimano. And it's SRAM, not SRAM. So organic pads have the benefit of they're quieter. They have a softer feel, so some people like to talk about it's easier to modulate your power with organic. And the big downside of organic pads is they don't last as long, especially if you're riding in a lot of wet or muddy or just kind of dirty riding conditions. Metallic pads are a lot stronger and more powerful. They last way longer, especially in those gnarly conditions that I just mentioned. The downside of metallics is they can sound like a middle school trombone concert, meaning they're noisy. Most bikes come spec'd with metallic pads, and if you're listening to this and you're like, oh man, I don't really know what kind of pads I should get, my recommendation is just get metallic unless the noise is really bothering you. So how do you know what type of brakes you have? Well, most people out there are gonna have one of two brands, which are either Shimano or SRAM. Then similar to a car, you know, if you have a Volkswagen, there's different types of Volkswagens. There's the make and the model. Same deal goes with brakes. So I have SRAM brakes and I have the Guide 2s. So when you go into your friendly local bike shop, they're gonna want to know that information. And it's really helpful if you just take your bike and they can look at it and tell you, or you can look at the brake lever itself and it's going to say on there, you know, if it's Shimano, it should say something like SLX or XTR. And then if it's SRAM, like what I have, you can see it says G2 right on the lever.
Hey, welcome to View.
Hey, how's it going?
Great. What can I help you with today?
I need some brake pads.
Excellent. Do you know what kind of brakes you have? SRAM or Shimano?
Ooh. No, I don't.
Ooh. Do you have your bike with you by chance?
Yeah, I do.
Well, why don't you go grab your bike and bring it on in?
Okay.
Excellent. You brought your bike in.
Yeah.
It looks like you have SRAM G2s. Those are great brakes. Do you know what kind of pad you're looking for?
Yes, because I watched this awesome video on how to replace my brake pads and I want metallic.
Those are great. I'll go grab them for you.
Thank you. At this point, we know how to check our pads for wear. We know the difference between the different kinds of pads and which one you're gonna choose. You know how to buy the right pads for your bike. So it's time, finally, to change your pads. We're gonna go over this in 5 steps. Number 1, you've already learned how to take your wheel out. Number 2, you've already learned how to take your pads out. Number 3 is get intimate with your pistons. Number 4 is put those pads back. And number 5 is get the wheel back in the bike and then you're ready to roll. We're gonna jump into number 3, because we've already covered the first 2, get intimate with your pistons. Now, I have done the cardinal sin of pulling my brake lever with no pads and nothing in between the pistons, which means the pistons are really far out, and peeking in there, they're pretty dirty. So this is kind of next level, like bike shop stuff. You do not need to do this, but we're gonna do it for the sake of this video and for the health of my pads and my brakes in general. We're gonna clean these guys up a little bit. And the way we're gonna do that is with alcohol and a Q-tip, so things that you should have at home. And I'm gonna spray some alcohol in the pistons here, and then just get a Q-tip, wipe it around the pistons. And you know, some of the bike speak that you might hear is, oh, I've got like the 2-piston brakes or the 4-piston brakes. These are the pistons here. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4-piston brakes. Voila. And now they're nice and clean. And it's the pistons that actually push in on the pads that grip the caliper, which is what ultimately allows you to stop when you're riding your bike. All right, so we have cleaned the pistons. And now what you need to do before you replace your pads is you gotta push these pistons back in. A note here, if you have not changed the brake fluid in your brakes in a year or more, go pay your local bike shop a visit and get that brake fluid replaced. And the term there is brake bleed. So you're gonna walk in and you're gonna say, hey, I'd love to get my brakes bled, and you're gonna have your bike with you and it's just gonna be easy peasy. So what we're gonna do here before the pads go back in is push the pistons back into the caliper. And you wanna use something soft. So I actually find that a tire lever is ideal. There is a specific tool for this, but I definitely don't own it. And you wanna be gentle here. I've chipped a piston, getting a little aggressive with this, but you're just gonna gently push in on your pistons. Be gentle, but also be persistent, and eventually they're gonna go back in. I was able to get my pistons all the way back in. It doesn't need to be perfect. They don't all have to be 100% flush, but just for the most part, they should be back in the caliper. And then it's time for step 4. Let's put the brakes back into the caliper. So a reminder to not touch the brake pads with your fingers. So if you have Shimano brake pads, there's gonna be a left and a right, and so you wanna pay attention to that. The left of your bike is, if you're riding your bike, it's your left, or you could think of it as the non-drive side, and the drive side part of your bike is the part with the chain on it. But the SRAM pads do not have a left and a right, which is great for me because I always mess up my left and my right. So I'm sliding the brake pads in, and basically I'm gripping them at the top, sliding them into the caliper, and then looking for where the holes line up. And the angle is crucial there. And then I'm gonna grab the world's smallest bolt and just wiggle it in there. Grab that 2.5 millimeter Allen, tighten it up. The bike shop is going to give you some, Newton meter spec. This doesn't need to be super tight. You could be gentle, don't overly tighten that guy. And then take your cotter pin. Is that what this is called? I call it a little wing nut pin. It's not the right term. That little guy, slide it on there, and bam, your pads are back in your bike. So we're ready for step 5. Let's get the wheel back in. This is where you want to kind of eye up the gap between your pads and notice your rotor, because you're going to have to line up 2 things. One is the chain on the cassette, and the second one is the rotor between your pads. And if everything goes well, it just slides right in there. Oh. You might have to phone a friend to get your axle. And then this always involves a little bit of wiggling. Swish. There we go. Whew. All right, and we're gonna tighten our axle bolt. This one is more important that it's really tight. Again, this has a Newton meter spec. For the home mechanics, give it a good push, not too, you don't want it to be too tight, but it should be snug. I will always take the bike down and pull laterally on the wheel to make sure there's no play there. And then I'm just gonna release that. All right, once your wheel is back in your bike, it's time for final adjustments. the first thing you're gonna wanna do is just squeeze your brake lever a few times to get those pistons back in range. And then start spinning your tire and just notice, listen, see how freely your wheel is spinning. Noticing and again listening, and also looking for, is your rotor hitting your brake pads at all? If it is, and this is frustrating, but oftentimes they're not perfect. It's not, your rotor won't be perfectly centered. So then what you need to do is go through the process of adjusting your caliper a little bit. And there's a little bit of art, a little bit of science to this. What I like to do is loosen the caliper bolts. And then I always start with just going back to that brake lever and squeezing it and hoping everything is going to center itself. So I'm gonna squeeze the brake lever a few times. And then without doing anything else, I'm gonna retighten my caliper bolts. And then spin the wheel. And then recheck the brake lever. Squeeze, 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 and then spin again. And I'm looking, listening, watching. It's pretty good. I would ride this. If I was racing, I would spend a little bit more time to get it perfectly dialed, but I'm happy with the way this is spinning. I've got new brake pads on. I'm feeling super confident, and I hope you are too. We did it! We learned more than we thought there possibly was to know about brake pads, and now we feel more confident about our bike and heading out onto the trails, knowing we're gonna have the full stopping power of new brake pads behind us. A few other things to be aware of: an inconsistent feel in your brakes, meaning if you apply pressure to your brake lever and it feels really squishy, or you find that your levers are coming all the way to the bars, that means you most likely have air in your brake lines and you need what we call a brake bleed, and that's a great thing to take your bike in to your local shop for. Otherwise, I hope you found this video helpful. Please like and subscribe. It does wonders to help us grow our channel and be able to provide more high quality content for you. And I want to say a huge thank you to all my sponsors, for whom without their support these videos wouldn't be possible. So Deity, Ergon, SRAM, Ride Concepts, Smith Optics, Patagonia, and Trail Butter. Those brands are all absolutely amazing. Otherwise, I hope you guys have a fantastic day, and be fit, be strong, and be brave.